Journey with me now to an earlier time. It was the 1990s, the early days of research on climbing. Studies were few in number. Clinicians were just defining methods for testing climbers, and sometimes the results were quite unexpected. As one recently uncovered manuscript from the era stated, "Absoluteth hand grippeth strength in climbers elite who partake in the competitions of the clambering ranketh at the 50th and 75th percentile of New World age-matched norms for males and females, respectively." Another manuscript of the time states, "We findeth no significant difference in hand grippeth strengths among the climbers of the elite, the climbers of the recreation, and those who climbeth not."
Okay, that's enough of that. But I hope you can forgive me for having a little bit of fun with this topic. And do note that although I did dress up the language of the studies in question for the sake of humor, I'm actually not misrepresenting their findings. They couldn't detect a significant difference in hand strength between elite climbers and other populations. And that's a little odd, right? Well, it turns out that these studies are a great lesson in why specificity matters in testing, in our choices of training activities, and why we really need to pay attention to what climbers actually do rather than making assumptions. The reason these studies couldn't find a difference between climbers and other populations is that they used the wrong testing method. They used what's called a hand grip dynamometer to test the hand strength of climbers. It's a device that looks like this one that you can buy on Amazon. It measures the force produced by bracing the device against the palm and using the fingers to pull a bar towards the palm in a concentric muscular contraction. And it works a lot like this hand exerciser that I have right here. So what's the problem with this? Well, it turns out that this is not what we do when we use holds in climbing. And this particular type of hand strength isn't really developed by climbing either, nor does it seem to be important to climbing performance. So let me go into it a little bit. See, there are three different types of muscular contractions. There's concentric contractions, which are when a muscle shortens as it applies force. This would be the closing action when using a hand gripper. Then there are eccentric contractions in which the muscle lengthens as it applies force. So this would be the opening action when using a hand gripper if you didn't just let it go immediately, but rather, let go of it slowly. The muscles are lengthening as they're resisting the force of the spring. Then there are isometric contractions, in which a muscle neither shortens or lengthens. It stays the same length as it applies force. And if we were to hold the hand gripper closed, that's an example of an isometric contraction. So if we know that climbing doesn't really rely on concentric contractions of the finger flexors, what kind of contractions does climbing utilize? Here's some video I shot recently of my friend Aaron Shammy working on the route called the Perfect Drug down in American Fork Canyon. Let's start by looking at the left hand. First, while he's on the hold, we see that the finger joints maintain a constant angle, and the amount of extension at the wrist seems to not change. So if the joints aren't moving while the force is being applied, then we know we're seeing an isometric contraction. Then let's look at the right hand. We also see that while he's engaging the handhold, his fingers and wrist maintain consistent angles of flexion. Then coming back to the left hand again, we see a consistent angle in the finger joints and the wrist. And there is more nuance to it than this, but this very brief example shows what is typical in climbing. That while we're engaging handholds, we rely heavily on isometric contractions of the finger flexors. So what's the best way to develop isometric strength? Well, turns out that isometric strength is very specific. Concentric and eccentric training can have a small impact on isometric strength, but real improvements in isometric strength have to come from isometric exercises. And the strength gains in isometric exercises are also specific to the joint angle used in those exercises. And for example, I can remember a study I read a few years ago that I believe used a 90-degree angle at the elbow. with doing isometric contractions, and they found that most of the strength gains occurred within 5 degrees plus or minus of the joint angle that was used in the training. So this is a good explanation as to why, if you're going to use a hangboard, you can't just train closed crimps all day. You need to train a variety of joint angles and hand positions to see improvements in strength that might be meaningful to climbing. So hand exercisers that primarily train concentric contractions have been marketed to climbers for decades without any real proof of their effectiveness. You know, a lot of you probably remember the classic rubber donut, and there are many different spring-loaded devices out there with a lot of variations. And just this month I've been seeing a new one marketed to climbers on social media. But these devices train the muscles in the wrong way, if they train the muscles at all. So it's really safe to say that we don't need to waste our money or our time on these things, as these devices are not really capable of providing a direct and measurable impact on our climbing. Now, one final note, I do know that there are videos out there that advocate the use of these devices for climbers. But when we're watching those videos, we should ask ourselves what claims are being made. How well formed are the claims? Are they specific or are they kind of vague? Are they based on any science or real life observation of climbers? Or are they based on something else like theory or a single poorly formed test? As always, we need to remain focused on the pragmatics. We can't fall for marketing or incomplete theories. Anyway, that's it for this video. Have fun, send hard, and I'll see you next time.